Boom. Are you sharing the screen? I need to share the screen, right? That one? Which one do you want me to share?
You want to share the desktop or the slide only? You want to share the whole thing, then screen. Yeah. Probably, yeah.
Great. All right, let's be quick. Prove it. Prove I can shut my trap. Okay. Oh, man. Look back to it so much on Tuesday. Feels great today, though. Whatever my back? Yeah. Well, it's called being old. Yeah, I was afraid I was gonna get that question today. I was afraid people were gonna use a whip because I didn't bike today. And it's not because of the rain. I started teaching this like graduate class at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm so unused to that. I'm used to like being at home until like noon and coming into that 2500 goes in that class at 12 o'clock, 12:45. It was 10:10. I'm like, holy shit. I mean, holy crap, I gotta get to class. So I just had to get in my car and go. I couldn't ride my bike. So I would use my bike. There's no temperature that'll stop me from riding my bike. I think it's icy though. See, I use sustainable energy and I have gloves that are heated. So just keep doing it all through the winter. It's awesome. Of course, it gets a little icy, it's a little dicey. Although my friends in Alberta tell me that basically they just get tired of studs in. I'm kind of went for that. I don't really want to buy any tires. That's kind of expensive. You don't need to use them for like 2 weeks here, right? Anyways, I just want you guys to know I'm sustainable. Just so you know, I don't want anyone to think I'm not. In my car, have you seen my car? You want to see my car? What kind of car do I drive? A bike? No, I have a car. 2006 Hummer. 2006 Hummer, that'd be great. I love that. So that would be more sustainable. What?
We're having a side conversation.
No. You can pay attention here. You can't talk. So, I drive an old Honda. Okay, so here we go. We're just gonna do a couple slides. And then we'll talk about the project. So what's the cost of the project? Literally a few slides. You guys will have all seen all these slides already. I just want to make a few points, and then we do have to do the videos. So we'll talk about the project. And give you some time to chat about that and get that at least organized. So the first thing is, roadmap to the end of the term. So basically, we're going to talk about externalities. We're talking about policies, right, to deal with this. So that's basically it. We're basically away from focusing on. Well, we still talk about dirty energy because we have to, right? Because we're trying to figure out this transition away from it. We talk about how can we make that transition happen in the context of climate change and renewable energy, right? So that's it. And there's a lot of really interesting energy stuff here. So this idea of renewable energy credits, really interesting markets happening with that. Carbon credits, really interesting markets happening with that as well. So there's huge opportunities to take what we know about the energy sector and apply them to the environmental sector that we want to sort of talk about that. So we'll talk about all that. So that's kind of the roadmap. We talked about this the other day. Basically we went through monopolies. All right, so cartels. Now we're going to just talk about these public goods and externalities. All right, so that's the keys. These externalities. What's an externality? Unpriced output of production. You guys have all heard that in some of the class. This is probably not new to most of you, but for anybody it is. That's the definition of an externality. Most outputs are priced and sold to someone who wants them. Some byproducts are discarded properly. Others enter the environment, right? And it's the ones that enter the environment, like carbon dioxide, water pollution, air pollution, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the ones we worry about. Those are the externalities, right? That give all of us heartburn and maybe other problems, actually. Okay. So that's definition of externality. That's the picture that we use in economics to show externalities and to say what we want to say in economics, which is what? Which is that as a result of supply or demand and supply in private markets, so PMC is basically the private marginal cost of producing any good. The market would set the quantity, the price where the demand function crosses the private marginal cost, right? That'd be ignoring the externality. But we recognize the externalities happening, so we call this a marginal external cost. So with each production of, say, driving your car, using the lights in here, anything that basically uses any energy source, say in the US and pretty much anywhere, is creating an externality the more units of it that we produce, right? And the damages get bigger the more units we produce, right? So literally, if we'd spent all of our history only producing, 500 million tons of carbon dioxide from energy production through all of human history, we wouldn't be worried about climate change right now. Right, but the fact that we're using 30 billion tons rather than 500 million tons, and we keep increasing it, means that the damages from each additional ton are bigger. It's bigger. All right, so we worry about it a lot. Okay, so there's damages that occur. These are the externalities. So MEC is called marginal external cost. All right, this is the definition. It's the damages with each unit of whatever the good is. In our case, in this class, we'll be thinking about it in terms of energy. It's produced. What would be the marginal external cost of solar power? Would there be a marginal external cost of solar power? Anybody know what that is? Marginal external cost of solar power? Would there be any? What do you think? Yeah?
Maybe the cost could be the material that's put into the solar panels.
Okay, yeah. So some of the materials that are used to make solar panels, the like metal that goes into them, these crystalline structures and whatnot. There's production processes there that could have some emissions that would be externalities. Okay, that's good.
Also, if solar panels put on farmland, there could be a cost to using that land for either farming or solar or any other purpose.
Okay, so that would actually be a private cost. Okay, so if you take land out of agricultural production and use it for solar power, and say you drive up the cost of agricultural products, which is taking land away from agriculture, that's actually a market effect. That would be captured by the market. However, if by taking that land out of agricultural production, so you have these solar panels on there and they're no longer, you don't have as much infiltration of water or something like that on the surface and get more runoff, perhaps that would be an external cost, right? The runoff, the additional runoff that could happen. Maybe, maybe you don't just take agricultural land out, but you actually use maybe some parkland or something like that that's open. And maybe you do some harm to some species. I don't know which ones. There could be some animals that could be harmed by that, right? Those would be external costs. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, don't some birds when they fly across solar fields just get obliterated?
Maybe some birds get fried, right, by all the reflection. Maybe the neighbors, when they look at it, their eyes get burned out. I don't know, right? There could be some, so yeah, there could be some externalities. They're probably a lot lower than the externalities of fossil fuels. So this thing for an equivalent amount of energy would be a lot lower, I think, probably for solar than it is for, say, gasoline or for coal-fired power plants or for natural gas, right? But nonetheless, there probably would be some external costs, right? And of course, we would add together these external costs with the private costs to get what we'll call the social marginal cost. And if we were to sort of equate the social marginal cost with the demand function, then we would consume less and pay a higher price. So that's just kind of economic rationale for saying that if we were to incorporate or account for these externalities, we should be paying a higher price for the things we consume. So the gasoline that we drive around with, the electricity we consume, these lights, et cetera, we should be paying a higher cost for that as a result of the externalities, right? And by and large, actually we do, right? So if you get anything from Bruce's lecture, the ones online, what you should get is we've actually done quite a lot to drive up the cost of producing electricity with coal in particular, but also with other forms of electricity from natural gas. We've also got regulations on those plants. That's driven up the cost for electricity production. So we now actually probably do consume less of it than we would otherwise consume. Okay. All right, so that's that. Any questions about that one? So these, I'm not gonna, we went over these. You can go online, you can look at the slide to get the actual definition of them, right? So this is just something, well, so this helps to, well, actually, there's multiple ways to describe the same thing. All right, and so this is just providing some framework for describing the exact same thing a different way. So what I've done here is created a graph that is in terms of the price of, use an example from Bruce's lecture, sulfur dioxide reduction, right? So the quantity now is sulfur dioxide that's reduced. So abatement of sulfur dioxide. So it's elimination of the externality, right, in the electricity sector. And one can imagine that there's a cost of doing that. Bruce talked about scrubbers. He talked about taking these things called scrubbers and putting them on the flues of electric power plants that use coal. And basically what they do is essentially scrub the sulfur dioxide out of the gases and keep the sulfur dioxide from getting in the atmosphere. So you can imagine if you're a company like American Electric Power or any other company that has to put these things on your power plants, that they're costly, and then it would have a marginal cost. So there would be a cost function associated with reducing the externality, right? At the same time, there's a demand. Society has a demand to do that. The reason why we support regulations for telling power plants to put these scrubbers on their power plants is because we actually want a cleaner environment. So we have a demand for reduction in sulfur dioxide. So we can think of these externalities and use the same demand and supply framework that we use in economics elsewhere to describe essentially a market for the externality, right? Okay, so we have a demand function, and just by definition, the demand function for the externality reduction is called a marginal benefit function, because we get a benefit, we get an extra benefit out of every ton of that crap that we take out of the flue gases from a coal burning power plant. On your cars, anyone drive a car today? Y'all drove a car, yeah? So what do you have on your car that did the same thing? Anyone have a catalytic converter on their car? Yeah, you had one? It hadn't been stolen yet, has it? It was? There you go. So you know how much these things cost, right? Yeah, so but a catalytic converter is just like a precipitator or a thing that takes sulfur dioxide off a coal burning power plant. When it's on your car, it takes the particulate matter and the nitrogen oxide and the volatile organic compounds out of the gasoline when you combust it, and basically puts it into, I don't know, some kind of chemical reaction inside your car, inside the catalytic converter, right? Keeps it from getting into the atmosphere. Okay, so there's a cost function for that. So we, you know, so anyway, there's this demand for reducing emissions or reducing the externality, and there's also a cost function. So why do we do this? So why do we bother with this? Well, the reason is because for the rest of the class, we tend to talk about sort of pollution permits. We talk about pollution markets. So the reason we try to create these demand and supply functions for things like sulfur dioxide or carbon dioxide or other kinds of externalities in the water quality world, we also have some trading of nitrogen permits and water quality. We do that because we can sometimes use markets to get this stuff out of the system efficiently and effectively, right? We can lower costs, it can create a marketable commodity out of this pollution stuff, right? So the point of doing this is just to say, hey, look, you know, we can actually take this pollution, and if we think about it a different way, we can create a market out of it, and we can create a way to take it out of the environment with a market mechanism, right? So the reason why we do this, the reason why we sort of flip this around and say, well, what's a demand and supply way of viewing an externality is so that we can then ultimately get to a market concept. Okay, so what's important for you to understand is the market benefit is the demand for pollution reduction. I guarantee you there'll be a quiz question on that. And then we can also have a marginal cost for reducing pollution. Okay, yippee, really quick. So there's a lot of different externalities. Bruce talked about a lot of these, but just remember in the energy sector, there's an enormous number of them. There's mining related impacts, there's transport related impacts, and there's consumption related impacts. We tend to focus on these consumption related ones. In this class, we tend to ignore these, but they're really not any less important. In fact, I mean, this is one of the big problems we have in Ohio right now, right? Is dealing with some of the historical mining related impacts. There's lots of mines out there that were put in hundreds of years ago that are still causing environmental degradation today, and we're paying for it. We're paying for it now, right? So that still happens. And without a doubt, some of the things that we're doing on the landscape today will cause damages down the road that people down the road will be paying for, right? So we don't talk about these as much in this class, but they are important. We don't talk a lot about the transport ones. This was really, when did the transport one just flare up recently as a big issue? Come on, did it flare up recently? Who experienced some kind of a transport related accident? Yeah.
Just the oil spill that happened in California.
Yeah, California, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. I mean, there's literally pipelines everywhere transporting this stuff. So anyone could be susceptible to this. Just so happened that they're the ones who drew the short straw that day and had the accident, right? Yeah. So we don't spend as much time talking about them. We spend almost all of our time talking about these. Just remember that those do exist. There are externalities that are out there. And we actually have numbers for a lot of this stuff. So we can calculate the effect of the externalities of coal and natural gas and transport fuels on the economy. These are estimates. They're about 15, well, 2009, it's not 15, it's about 11 or 12 years old. The numbers have changed, but nonetheless, we do have calculations of what the total impact of some of these things are on the economy in terms of the externalities. And they're not small, right? Okay, so just so you know, we can actually calculate those. Just the final definition, you guys have had this in class before, I assume it's a public good because climate change is public goods. Return to climate change, we'll talk about public goods. It's a good that's non-rivalrous and non-excluded. Okay, so clean air, clean water are public goods because they're non-rivalrous and non-excluded. That just means what? Non-rivalrous means what? Means that if you consume it, you don't exclude somebody else from consuming it. You gonna agree on that? Yeah. So non-rivalrous means that if you consume it, you're not excluding someone else from consuming it. You don't prevent someone else. I want to use better terminology. You don't prevent somebody else from consuming that same thing. All right. So if you're exposed to some clean air and you take a nice breath of clean air, you're not preventing anyone else from actually also taking a breath of clean air. Whereas if you go to the store and you buy a bottle of oxygen, someone else can't buy that exact same bottle of oxygen, right? So that's non-rivalrous. Excludable, non-excludable means what? Slightly different. It sounds very similar, but it's slightly different. A non-excludable good means that you can't use a pricing mechanism or income to keep somebody else from essentially having access to that good or service. So in the context of air, again, it's that we're not paying a price for the air anyway, so no one's excluded from access to that air, right? And it's not really possible to prevent people from accessing that same air. Except by really, really, really bad means, right? Okay, so that's kind of what a public good is, and that's our obsession for the rest of the class is the public good for the air above us. And the flowers. and birds. Isn't that exciting? You guys are so quiet today. Anybody have anything to say about any of that? Okay, good. All right, so we're done with that. All right, so that's it. So make sure to read those things. This was mainly just so that, you know, when you do the quiz goes really well. If anyone noticed, I put an extra credit problem on the website, right on the Karma site, so you can do the extra credit problem until next week to do it. It's just write I think 200 to 400 words. Okay, so not long. It's like a page, less than a page really. But just write some things on that if you want. It's up to 1%. That's literally 1%. Okay, so I'll be the one to read it, and you may or may not get the full 1%, but you know, doing it, writing something sensible will probably get you more than 0% for sure, right? Writing something sensible will probably get you really close to 1%, all right? So that literally means if your grade at the end of the term is a, you know, if your grade at the end of the term is a 50, you get a 51, okay? So that's what the 1% means. All right, so the final project. So I appreciate everybody for showing up today. It's great. So we got to talk about the final project. So it's a group project. I know nobody likes group projects. I know that. Do you guys like group projects? Who in here likes group projects? But you only, really? Do you like group projects if you have a bad group? Yeah, no one likes that. Okay, so group projects are really hard, but on the other hand, so Bruce and I have done this both ways for this class. And we found that for this last material, the group project is far better than there's still a test. The test really covers heavily at the beginning of the class. So you get a chance to retake the same stuff. It won't be as hard as the last time because you will have already seen the questions you could have on it, right? But it's a much better way to learn the final material, actually, is our experience. So that's why we do it. So, and I think both of us are convinced. And even last year when we didn't get to do it the same way we're doing it this year, it seemed to work out really well. Okay, so humor us and please take this really seriously and do it as to the best of your ability. The group project involves 2 stages. One is a written product, which is, you know, basically a 2-page policy statement on one of the 6 questions. And there's 6 questions. You're all going to be assigned a particular question. So you're going to have a particular question you're going to have to answer. And you're going to be given a direction for that, either for or against that question. All right, so each of you may well be assigned to answer a question in the way in which you disagree with vehemently, right? But you still have to answer it in that way, either for or against it. So you may have to take an opposing view to where either your political or your ideological or your economic views lie. But it's useful to do that because you always want to be able to have good arguments, right, to battle down people who maybe disagree with you. So this gives you a chance to then really get into their heads and understand what they're thinking in response to a particular question. So the first part is you got to write a policy statement that supports the viewpoint you're asked to take. And you do that as a group. Okay, and that is the formation, the basis for your PowerPoint. So the idea is, you know, and you do have to do that by the 19th of November. So that's coming up. It's about a month, a little less than a month. But you write that, and then you basically have your presentation. Okay, and then you basically have to do a presentation. You have to make a PowerPoint out of that. All right, and then you have to give the presentation. So there is some extra stuff you have to do, but all of the work really is in the sort of doing the research and the analysis, the talking, thinking, to answer the policy question up front, and then to create a presentation out of that, 7-minute presentation. That's the second part. Create a PowerPoint, and then give the presentation here in class to your peers, right? And you have to do that as a group. So the group has to do that, and everybody needs to participate in that. Okay. Now, it's set up so with each question, there's both a for and against side. So we're trying to create a group that's sort of for the question and a group that's against the question, and that they'll give their presentations, and then they'll have a little bit of a chance to debate it, discuss it, as well as take questions from the rest of the people here. Okay. So this has worked out really well in the past. Last year, we obviously didn't get to do that because we were stuck in Carmen and didn't know how it would work out to have that kind of a debate. So we just had people submit videos, and it has worked out great. But this year we'll go back to the old way of having to just have a little bit of dialogue, all right? Okay, so it's not entirely complicated, but so requirement 1, written statement, 1,000 words, maximum 1,000 words. Okay, it doesn't have to be 1,000 words actually, all right? Maximum 1,000 words. And that's important. It just has to be, you know, how many ever words has to be less than 1,000, but they have to be good words. Okay, you can write that as a group. You got to have the following. We're pretty clear on the rubric here as to what you got to have in there: an introduction, problem statement, analysis, and conclusion. We will pay attention to the general writing style, and you have to have some citations. Okay. Yep.
The citations included in the words.
No. So let's just be extra. So a minimum of 8 citations. Now citations could be anything. It could be web pages, academic journal articles, newspaper articles, blog postings, you name it. But you have to cite it, and you have to just provide some sort of a link to it. I'm not really particular about how the citations show up in your citation, when you put the citations in there. But what I'm particular about is being able to find it. So if you cite something, you know, so you cite some blog post like the, you know, Southeast Ohio Gazette or something like that, and you put that as a citation in the text, then at the end, there better be a way for me to go find that, okay? Usually that's gonna be somehow online, all right? But if I can't find it, then it won't count, all right? So, and literally on each of these, Bruce, myself, and we forced Thomas as well. He doesn't know yet, but we forced him to read it and grade it. It's basically the 3 of us get together and talk about it. So we're all gonna be looking for it. Probably the only people who are gonna look for the citations are gonna be me and Thomas. But nonetheless, I will look for stuff, right? So just make sure, I don't really care how it looks, just make sure it's in there that I can find it, okay? So, so that's really critical. All right, so the citations are useful to have. Oh, there you go. Citations must be provided, but they don't count. I was correct about something. All right, then there's a preparation of the group presentation. You can make the presentation in class. By 50% of the grade, I mean that the written product and the PowerPoint and the presentation are both worth half of the total grade for this assignment, okay? So when that says 50%, that means that part of the PowerPoint and the presentation, all right? Now, I will say that we will be providing you comments on the written part before the presentation. So you're all going to get that grade before the presentation happens. And you'll have comments from the 3 of us. And we would encourage you to use that in terms of developing your presentation. So if, for instance, you know, let's just go to one of the questions to give you an example. So let's look at this AEP one. So, you know, you guys all know that Bruce worked for AEP. And so if one of these questions is this one, you know, they're planning to reduce CO2 emissions by 70% by 2030, 80% by 2050. I think it's even more actually now. But this is where they were in 2019. You know, if you know, for instance, one of the comments on your written product is be more specific about what the economic implications for AEP might be, right? Like for instance, if you don't really talk much about how it can affect their profits, both on the cost side as well as the potential revenue side, right? If you say nothing specific in your policy brief that says that, you know, the region is growing, younger people are moving to Central Ohio, AEP services Central Ohio, and we think that they're going to be able to provide a lot more solar power and get a higher pricing premium on that because the young people here actually demand that, right? You need to be clear about that. If you don't say that in the policy statement, and for instance, one of the comments is be more specific about how they're going to increase their revenues in the future, then be more specific about it in your presentation, okay? So that will be something that we will be looking for is, you know, did you take some of the advice you might have gotten in the written in our response to your policy statement and incorporate that into your presentation. Right? So, and that's not really going to require you to do a whole lot more research, but it will require you to maybe retool and rethink how you present the material, right? Yeah.
Is the grade given for the whole group or are in part of it individual?
Yeah, so the grade is for the whole group. Okay, the grade's for the whole group. Because you're going to be providing just one person will be assigned, it says on here somewhere, one person is one person will have to turn in each of the papers, right? In the group. And then one person will turn in the PowerPoint, probably the same person. But you can choose who you do have to do that, and everybody will get the same grade. Okay. So to that point, knowing that sometimes groups don't work well, you do get the chance to grade your peers. It's a requirement. There aren't any points for it, but there will be an opportunity at the end of the course to turn in for each of you anonymously. It won't be anonymous. You'll be actually providing your name to Bruce and I, because we can't otherwise do anything with the information. But the rest of you will know that you can, through a Qualtrics survey, provide a grade for each of your peers, and we'll use that information in terms of assigning individual grades. Okay. If someone is here at the presentation and doesn't say anything at all during the presentation, then they'll probably get a lower grade. Right, so we want everybody to participate in the presentation. So that's how we'll start distinguishing to some extent. We're not going to make a big effort to try to distinguish people, but only if at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't show up to any of the group meetings, doesn't participate at all, doesn't do anything, and 5 of the 6 people all say that, then that person will get a lower grade. Okay. So there's an opportunity to sort of grade your peers. I'm not encouraging you to grade your peers poorly or really well, but I'm just saying if that option is available, we do know that some people take advantage of this. Not expecting people to or not take advantage of, but sometimes that happens, and you have an option as a teammate to grade your peer. So we'll leave it at that. Okay. I didn't put it on this thing, but I'll say here, and I'm not gonna say it again, but I will say here that if anybody feels that they're being taken advantage of and they want to write their own paper for this, I have no way of doing this for the presentation, so you can't do your own presentation, but if anybody wants to write their own paper for this, then you can come and see me and we can talk about that. So I will give you a chance to do that. So if you decide you want to write your own paper, you'll still have to participate with your group in the presentation. But if you want to write your own paper, then I can give you the opportunity to write your own paper, right? So if you feel like you can do such a better job in your group, working on your own, then you can feel free to do that. But you still have to work with them on the presentation. Okay. So. All right, is that clear enough? I have to be honest with you guys, I never liked group projects until I saw how well it worked about 8 years ago when Bruce and I tried it, because it just seemed like people understood stuff better in terms of the material, in terms of how to deal with these externalities. And I think because they're actually so complicated, that actually working as a group is helpful for that. So I think sometimes the economics, we tend to simplify it so much that if you just sort of lecture about it and don't force or have you sort of work with each other, think about it, think about presenting it, then I think a lot of the nuances of it get missed. Maybe just do lecture-based material if you're testing. So I think this is a better way to sort of help you guys, I think, both learn those nuances. As well as the issue is that you're going to be tasked with convincing. I don't think you guys have to convince people in this class so much of some of the things that we have to deal with in terms of cleaning up the externalities in the energy sector, but you have to convince people outside of this class about it, right? And so it's really important to be able to have the best arguments for doing that. I think this helps hone some of those better arguments, helps you hone those arguments. Because ultimately, if you guys can't convince your peers, like people your own age, who maybe don't think like you do, if you can convince them to think more like you do, then that's probably a good thing, right? So that's kind of the purpose here, is to try to sort of push that along in addition to learning the material. Okay. Okay, so there's that. And then the questions, there's, the questions are so exciting that I know everybody wants to work on all of them, but you only get to work on one of them. And you're either on the for side or the against side, so they've all been tested for a for side and against side. And I think, last year I screwed up. It was me. I screwed up one of the questions. It was about House Bill 6. For those of you familiar with House Bill 6, I really messed that question up, and the groups were very confused on what the for side and against side was. In this case, in the cases we've used this year, I think all the for sides and against sides are very clear. But if you feel like they're unclear when you read them and you read the question you're given, then ask. Okay. Okay. So what we want to do now is, I assume I didn't print this out. So I didn't, but I have assigned all of you to a group. Okay. And it's 100% completely random. All right. So you're either, you got a question. So there's those 6 questions up there. You got a for side and against side. So each of you have been randomly assigned to a group, completely 100% randomly, with a random number generator. Okay. And that's your group. Those are your people. For better or worse, okay? So what you need to do is, what you need to do right now is just find those people. You can spend as much of the rest of the time as you want working with those folks. So we'll do it this way, just to sort of organize a little bit. Is like, why don't we do like question one over here, question 2 here, question 3 in the middle, question 4, question 5. All right, then 4 kind of in the front, against in the back. Okay, so look on the table and you can find yourself. Yeah.
Are you 5?
Yeah.
Me too. Are you a 4 or against? Me too. Okay.
I think it's a good time. I think Cole is just gonna have to figure out a way to get in touch with somebody.
This one?
Yeah, I think.
I think I can talk to her. Like try to talk to her.
We'll probably turn it off for the day because I think it's just have to touch base with our people.
Oh, okay.
Okay, awesome. Great, Chloe, thanks.
So I'll just close it then.
Yep.